And so let's talk about the cash for keys for a second. Some of the tenants are getting wise to the cash for keys. Okay. And that's basically, you know, you're holding someone over a barrel. I mean, it's extortion, really.
Welcome to the Tom Storey Show with Steve Karrasch and Tom Storey, where we discuss everything real estate or whatever else is on our minds.
At all, don't worry. I'll let you know on my end if anything changes. Sometimes it's just a little bit behind, but it's usually fine.
Okay.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Tom Storey Show. I appreciate you being here. This episode is sponsored by Realty Ninja, and you will learn more about them later in the program. Before we get started today, I'm going to ask you to like and subscribe like we always do. And if you're listening on the audio apps, make sure to leave a review. But we have a public service announcement. If you live in the city of Toronto, it is a leap year this year, and it is also the day that you have to declare your vacant home tax, because you're going to be woken up with a surprise this year, which is 3% of your assessed value. Thank you to our new mayor, instead of 1% if that property is vacant. So please make sure to declare. Also, if you're going to sell your property, you didn't declare. Davelle, you know this. We'll get into it, but it creates all these issues on closing. Now, if you're in BC listening, Steve, please give them the pitch in BC.
Speculation tax. I just did mine this morning. Don't worry, it doesn't apply to 99% of you, but 100% of you have to actually claim the exemption, which makes me wonder how much it costs to actually put this whole program in place and how much they collect. But yeah, speculation tax is in. And my goodness, I tried to do a video on this on my channel to be like, okay, so here's how you file for it. There is so much personal information in this speculation tax declaration that I couldn't put it up. Social insurance number, all the properties you own, everything, addresses, phone numbers, everything is there. It's crazy. The government knows everything about you, but file your speculation
tax. It's a bit more simple in Toronto. Just Google vacant home tax. It's on the City of Toronto's website. But enough about that. Let's get to today's. Davelle, you want to go?
Actually, they've actually simplified that declaration of the vacant home tax in Toronto, because I'm a landlord, and when I filed last year, I actually had to input the names of my tenants and their phone numbers, which I felt was a bit much. This year, I've noticed they've taken that element away. All I need to say is that the property's tenanted without giving the information of my tenant. So it has gotten a little bit better. But, you know, Steve, I hear you. It's like everybody's got a file, but most people don't actually owe any money.
Mm-hmm. And I think I remember hearing last year when they came out with the actual numbers that it ended up being about 2,000 properties in Toronto that didn't file. I don't know how many of them were actually vacant or they were just elderly, or, you know, Steve was talking about to me before we came online, like some people that have mental health issues that are going through things in life just don't know this is happening, and then they get hit with a bill. So there's all these different things that could happen.
So what we're seeing,
Morrison, hold on, let me introduce the guest.
Hang on. Let's not introduce. No, hang on. We're flowing good here. Introductions coming. I have seen these registered now. So what they do is they register these on title. So if you don't get your exemption, they register it on title. And of the people that I have seen them registered now on title. And let me tell you, it is not because the property is vacant. It is because the owner is going through something, or they're not the type of person to maybe open their bills or their mail. And that's who, like the one that I did see registered for sure is a recent foreclosure I had where the guy was been mentally ill for like 4 years. And make sure you tax that guy, BC government. Anyway, this is Davelle. Tom, go.
Davelle Morrison from Bosley Real Estate. Davelle, I've known of you for a long time. I think we've gotten to know each other a little bit better in the last few years, but we've never had an hour conversation. So why not do it live for thousands of people to listen?
Why not?
Welcome to the show. So let's some background for the listeners. Who's Davelle? What do they need to know about you?
Wow. Okay. Well, the 32nd, I've been an agent for almost 12 years now. I'm also a real estate investor as well. That's one of the reasons why I became an agent, was because I was buying properties and saw what it did to my own financial standing and felt that it's something good that everybody should do. I was raised by a single mother. I saw what happened when, she bought our townhouse, and, when I grew up, I felt like the poor kid in school. Everybody else's parents were together. They all had these big houses. We had a tiny little townhouse. But I saw over time how that property appreciated. And when she went to sell it, we were able to buy a bigger house. when that property appreciated, I could see how she was able to increase her financial standing. And so it's one of the reasons why I'm such a big believer in real estate, to help grow people's wealth. So it's one of the reasons why I became an agent, because I want to show people that they can do the same thing as well too.
I think it also goes a long way. I mean, Steve, have had these conversations is like when you're giving people advice on something, to have actually done it, like actually done it several times and knowing like, okay, some of this is very positive, but here's all the shit you got to watch out for as well, makes a huge difference. And, you know, and we also talk about the fact that there's so much advice being given out online, and a lot of it happens on maybe TikTok and platforms from people that have never done these things. I like the fact that you can back it up with actual experience. Now, on the investor side of things, maybe we'll start there.
Okay, sure.
I own several properties. Steve does. I know you do too. I think most of us are thinking long-term about this. Yeah, the last few years have been a bit of a wild ride, depending on what type of mortgage you have as well. But the one thing that we noticed that kind of left the market was buyers being investors, because cash flow didn't exist in Toronto unless you're putting, what, like 50% down. The interest rates are so high. You're hearing the horror stories of the tenants that don't move out. You know, we could go on for hours just about this. What are you noticing? Are investors creeping back in this year? Are they around? Are they looking for opportunities?
You know, it's tricky. I think in the Toronto market, it's hard to make your property cash flow positive. And I think that's what has gotten investors not so keen on the Toronto market. I think there's a lot of investors who are investing outside of Toronto because of that. You know, I tell some of my clients who are looking to get into the market, what makes sense for them is to buy a house and make sure there's a basement apartment in there. Getting that mortgage helper is huge. And I know a lot of people kind of sort of turn their noses up and be like, oh, I don't want to live in a place where, you know, there's somebody else living. But the reality is bringing in, especially now that rents have gone like this, if you're now bringing in almost $2,000 a month off of your, you know, for your house, that's really going to go a long way towards paying your bills, paying your mortgage. And so I think that, you know, more people need to consider the, you know, mortgage helper, if you will, if they don't want to consider it a basement apartment, because I think it really does put people in a better financial space. Now, you know, you talked about bad tenants. Now, maybe 2% of the tenants are bad, but of course, we only hear about the bad tenants. And so it makes some investors and landlords afraid to get into that market because they're like, oh my God, these bad tenants. Now, like I said, that's maybe 2% of the market. Most tenants are actually quite good. And I do think it's about vetting tenants properly, going, you know, running their credit report, calling up every single reference, calling up all past landlords. A lot of times when I read about these stories of bad tenants, when I look into it, it looks like the landlord never actually did their due diligence. So I think it's really important for landlords up front to do their due diligence to make sure they get the right tenant in their space. But once that tenant is in their space, you know, when I have a tenant move into one of my properties, I give them a little welcome gift. And at Christmas time, I give them another little Christmas gift. And it's usually chocolates or cookies or something like that. But to me, I want to foster goodwill towards them, so they also foster goodwill towards me. And, you know, I have tenants sometimes where when they need to leave my place, they actually text me and they're like, oh, is there any way that you have something else I could rent that's a little bit larger, because you've been such a great landlord, I want to rent from you. So I know that I'm doing something good when I've got tenants who are trying to just, even if they need to change their space, want to know if I've got something else for them, just because they like me as a landlord. I'm responsive to them.
Do you think there should almost be a program that people have to go through to become landlords in the city of Toronto? Now, you had the experience to back it up and you'd been through it, so you know what you're doing. But listen, when the market was taking off and there's a lot of speculation out there, people were like, I want to become a landlord. It became like the cool thing to do, but they had no idea what they were doing. And frankly, they're probably the ones trying to sell when interest rates doubled, because they're like, oh, I'm out. This isn't what I signed up for. You don't have to take a license to be a parent. That's never going to change. But you got to take a driver's license. Do you think there should be some type of education that investors have to, or no, is that you don't like the regulation side?
Yeah, that's, I just recently heard that the city of Brampton now you have to be licensed to be a landlord. And I also own a few Airbnbs, and some of them also have to be licensed. So, when I go through the licensing process in different, I guess, municipalities, I'm afraid because they don't know enough to license effectively or properly. They don't know enough to police properly. And so when I think of the government interference, it makes me go, oh, no, not that.
Yeah. So it's almost like, I've gotten really involved in like the one hobby throughout the pandemic I got into was watches, which is, by the way, a very dangerous hobby. And they always say you buy the seller. You buy the seller of the property, or sorry, of the watch. But maybe for this, it's like you got to make sure your landlord, like you should be asking questions. Is your landlord in Canada? Can I contact them directly? Like, as a tenant, and then obviously as a landlord, you got to vet the tenants as well. Steve, you rent out your basement. You bring in almost $1,700 a month. Was that always the goal from day? Not 1,700. Okay, but how much?
I probably could today. I think my basement's at like $1,300.
Okay,
something like that. So I have my procedure. Davelle, what does it look like when you're vetting those people? Because I've had the same thing. I've had, relatively speaking, good tenants. I have had the occasional issue, but what does your system look like if you're interviewing a new tenant or you just acquired a new property and you're trying to put somebody in it?
Well, first of all, I'm running their credit report. So I basically do nothing until I've run their credit score and make sure their credit score is over 700. So if it's below 700, I'm out. If they can't provide me a credit score because they're overseas, then I want to be able to pick up the phone and call somebody overseas to verify their banking information. So I was working on behalf of one of my clients. There was somebody who was coming in from Israel. And luckily, one of my friends was Israeli, but he was living in California. So I was able to get him to talk me through their documentation, make sure it was okay. But I was able to just pick up the phone and call people in Israel to verify the information. So I felt comfortable with it. So after I've dealt with the credit score, now I'm actually Googling the crap out of them. I want to see what they post. I want to see. So one of the things I've noticed recently with some tenants is they're not on social media, which is very difficult. I know that there's some people that poo-poo social media, but as a landlord, I am using it to vet you, and I want to see what you post. So then I'm going to be going through their previous landlords, their employer. I'm Googling their employer to make sure that it actually matches up with a letter of employment. I had the case one time when I was doing this on behalf of a client where I did this Google, and I noticed that the phone numbers and the names didn't match up with the dentist office they worked in. So when I Googled the dentist office and I just, cold called them, of course I found out that, no, they're just an occasional worker. They weren't working there full time. They'd had, a buddy to sign a letter. So it was completely fraudulent. So, done. I've had the other case where for a lot of realtors, they'll provide you with the credit score. But I don't trust people. This is such a big deal to me that's why I run my own credit score. And again, from doing that, I've had the case where I've noticed that the person applying for my client's place was a stripper. And, not to say that there's anything wrong with having a stripper as a tenant, but we were like, no, this isn't going to work.
Right.
So hopefully all the strippers will be coming for me now, but I'm sorry. To them.
I just want to pay in cash every month. We've heard stories from our friend Jordan at Pre-Condo where like it got so deep that an application would come in. It would be a false credit report. It would be like doctored. The employment letter would be fake. But then when you looked it up, there was a fake LinkedIn profile for like the boss of the company, a made up website. Like this thing, I was in an Uber not that long ago, and I took a call in the back, and then when I got off the phone, he's like, "Are you in real estate?" Because I was talking about something, right? I'm like, "Yeah, I'm in real estate." He's like, "Can you help me rent a place?" I was like, "Yeah, our team could help if you're interested." He's like, I'm going through a divorce. I send money back home every month. Like, I'm going to have to, are we okay with fake forms? And I'm like, no, like, we're not okay with any of that. Yeah, I had this conversation in Uber, and he was driving Uber because his life situation got stuck in. So I just want to be clear in the fact that, like, I don't think everyone, now you should not, do fraud of any sort ever. That's obvious. I think some of these people are in tough situations. This is like, and we're going through, listen, rental prices have gone up how much in the last 3 years? It's gone crazy. No one's gotten ahead from any of this. And people are desperate, and it's desperate.
But those people are probably that's where the fraud is likely coming from, is the desperation, because there is such a lack of affordable rentals that are out there. So they keep missing on stuff, or they're not in the best shape. And then they're like, crap, what do I have to do to actually get a place that I want? Oh no, I have to start fudging these numbers to make it look like I'm in a better situation than I am.
Because if you don't have the, 4 months upfront payment, which some people resort to if they can show anything else, what are you going to do? And maybe this conversation will be interesting, Davelle. I'd like your opinion on this. The one thing that seems to be coming, and it's fast and furious, is these purpose-built rental buildings. We didn't have these in Toronto for 30 years. Now they're popping up, and with the government taking away the HST, they will be built more. Do you think this solves something long term, or is this just going to stop prices from going up as fast on the rental side of things?
I think it's a great idea. Anytime that we can create more purpose-built rentals, I think there's a market for everything, right? So there's a market for the small landlords like ourselves. There's a market to have the purpose-built rentals, and I think that's great. If someone moves into a purpose-built rental, they know that they're not going to get kicked out for, landlord's use, or that someone's going to sell it, because they can stay there forever. That being said, the buildings that are being built that are purpose-built rentals are expensive. Mm-hmm. Like they're not cheap rentals. They're not quote unquote affordable rentals. They're basically condo buildings with all the amenities of a typical condo building in a rental apartment building. So I think that's great for the professional, but some of the people that we're talking about who are sort of below the margins, not so great.
And with those new buildings, at least as of how the regulations are now, they don't fall under rent control, right? So if you're living there, the maybe amateur landlord may forget to increase your rent the 2.5% they can every year, but guess what? Like whatever corporation built your building doesn't forget. And I think that's just something that people would need to know, at least in Ontario, right? At this point, is like, it's going to go up. And you're right. These are essentially like luxury rental buildings. This isn't affordable purpose-built rentals, right?
Hey agents, a clean and easy to manage real estate website is a must. Go to realtyninja.com/Tom right now and start your site totally for free and pay nothing until you launch. And then when it is your time to go live, you will save 20% off of your entire first year just for signing up at realtyninja.com/Tom.
Yeah, in fact, I've walked by, I live at Yonge and Eglinton in Toronto, and, I've walked by some of the signs for these rentals, and I'm like, ooh, I want to move in there. Look at that pool.
The experience for the renter, at least for the first year in these buildings, I would say is far superior if it's apples to apples for the average landlord in Toronto versus what they're willing to offer in these buildings, right? But I think eventually you end up paying a premium there. Okay, so let's talk about the market. When me and Steve have put out some videos recently just explaining what's happening, saying that, things are picking up. We are seeing things move faster. Yes, there's more competition coming back. It's starting in our markets with freehold housing, and it hasn't quite got there for condos, but it's better than it was at the end of last year. Now, the end of last year was a 20-year low in sales volume and yada, yada, yada. So it's picking up compared to that. And people online are mad. They're mad at us that we're saying that the market is picking up, and people are calling Steve a flat-out liar. Now, let's take me and Steve out of the equation for a second. What are you noticing with your clients, with your listings to start 2024? Are things picking up, or are we in our own crazy little worlds here?
No, what was interesting is that we had 2 houses that were listed, 2 detached houses below $1 million. We had listed them at the beginning of December. Sorry, getting over a cold.
No worries.
We had listed them at the beginning of December. They sat on the market, but then the first week of January hit. And I guess all those people decided it was their, New Year's resolution to get a house.
And we've noticed that the same thing, stuff that was sitting at the end of last year. Like, what do you think changed? Did we just wake up and decide we liked real estate again on January 1st? Like, what happened?
I think that people make New Year's resolutions and they want change. I've always heard that the statistics on realtor.ca pick up significantly in that time period between Christmas and New Year's. So you've got people that are sitting at home with nothing else to do because nobody's really working then. Mm-hmm. And they decide they want a house. And what happens at the beginning of January is there is not a lot on the market. So what is on the market gets a lot of attention. So for our 2 listings, all of a sudden showings went through the roof. I was shocked. I was like, what's going on? And we sold them.
Yep.
People were just ready to go. So yeah, I think they know that rates are coming down. Everybody said rates are coming down. So maybe they're thinking that, you know what, they'll just do a variable mortgage until rates come down further before they decide to lock in. But the reality is yes, sales were at an all-time low last year, but I think that we are seeing pretty much the bottom of the market. And so for buyers, this is really their opportunity to get in, because we know that once those interest rates start going down, more and more buyers are going to come into the market, and buyers won't be able to negotiate their prices anymore. And so now it's going to be, next year it's just going to be like, hang on for the ride. But, all those people who've always poo-pooed real estate, I'm like, this is why we're all real estate investors. We're here for the long run. And we know that, without making direct, predictions, we know that whatever we own today will be worth more 10 years from now.
Yeah, I mean, history backs that up to this point, at least, right? Like, it's hard to argue against that.
Yeah, but I think that that's what most people need to do, is think about this as something long-term. You're not flipping properties. To me, that's crazy.
Yeah.
But if you're property for the long term, you're going to do well.
I found a conversation I've had with clients a lot, which I think kind of builds credibility, is like, yes, I sell a real estate for a living. That is what I happen to do. But if I look at my retirement, how I've got that planned out, that's owning real estate. The selling real estate just helps me make money to buy more real estate, right? That's all the plan has always been. I'm not selling it to just try to retire off that. It's like, yes, that will be good, but you can work forever. I'm putting it into something else that will appreciate for me. And yeah, the last few years have been a little bit rocky. And if you look at condo numbers, I know you're pretty active in the condo market as well as I am. It's like condo prices are maybe like what they were at end of 2019 on a per square foot basis. It's been a weird ride, but then freehold properties have gone a little bit crazy. Let's for a second talk about where you live at Yonge and Egg.
Sure.
I grew up at Yonge and Lawrence. I had family at Yonge and Egg. I know that area very, very well. I used to go to the movie theater, the Silver City. It used to be right there. My dentist was there. Is the LRT finished? Is it going to be done in the next decade? What's going on? Are people going to be able to take transit going east-west?
So, of course, the Eglinton LRT is not finished. I always report to my neighbors about what side of the road they're allowing us to walk on this day, because every day they basically block off different roads, different sidewalks. You never know which part of the intersection you can cross at. It's quite annoying. Now, and last year they found something like 260 deficiencies along that Eglinton LRT line. So, in fact, I heard they had to rebuild a couple of stations. So I did actually speak to a friend of mine who works there, who of course wouldn't. He said
have they been on vacation for the last 2 years?
No. He doesn't even work in that section. But he basically said they're not even telling the employees when it's going to be open because this is embargoed information. Now, he did say that he believes it will be running by this fall.
I had a listing at 25 Broadway. I want to say 2015. And on my listing description, it said something along the lines of upcoming LRT. And I'm feeling a little bit bad. I don't think I lied to the buyers, but it was technically upcoming. I didn't think it would be 10 years from now. And do you think when that actually opens, it will be worth the wait? Is this a great thing for the city and for Midtown and what you can do with it?
I think any transit is a good thing. I think that, it's too bad that with our election cycle that it only lasts for 4 years. So all of our politicians only make decisions that can impact the next 4 years that drive votes. They don't want to make decisions that are going to impact us 10 years from now or 20 years from now. There's no, whether you liked him or didn't like him, but there's no longer a Mel Lastman who has a vision about where things could be. Right. And I remember reading the Globe and Mail did something about, various Toronto city councils. And when they talked about adding transit, back in the 1950s, they talked about adding a transit line along Queen Street, but they never did it. And it is a pain in the butt the transit that we're getting built, but I think the challenge is the management of it. So, right now, Queen Street is closed down in parts for them to work on building the Ontario line. And in my opinion, they have no business shutting down any other part of the city until they get that Eglinton LRT up. Focus on one thing first, get it done, and then move on. But I also think that, we need to look at things differently and think of more of the New York model, which is your construction happens overnight, so it doesn't bother people.
I was just in New York. I just got back yesterday, and that city. When people say like, "Oh, Toronto's like New York," it's not. It's not. Even saying New York on steroids, no, it's big. It's bigger than that. It's a whole different level. We are not that comparable yet.
So I was in Bangkok, Thailand, a couple weeks ago. That's where I was at the beginning of the year. Now, Bangkok, Thailand has a SkyTrain. And that SkyTrain, again, was recently built. It's not something that was built a long time ago, but they got it up and running. And I think if a place like Thailand can get their SkyTrain up and running in a few years, like, what are we doing? The mismanagement is huge. Because we're really, it makes me mad.
You're speaking Steve's language, yeah.
I will take your mismanagement and put Vancouver's twist on it. In 1912, Vancouver had a train that went from downtown Vancouver to Chilliwack, which is an hour 15, hour 20 away on the highway. In 1912, that they took it out in 1950. 4 times a day, a train ran back and forth to get people in and out from an hour and a half away until right downtown Vancouver. And so that's been gone since 1950, and we have not replaced it. Wow. It's a real problem. It's a real problem.
Okay, I want to take this conversation. We're going to go back to tenanted properties once more because I had never sold so many tenanted properties as I did last year. I know you work with a lot of investors. You're probably dealing with it as well. And, the obvious answer is, well, are you willing to do cash for keys and sign an N11 and get them out so everyone's happy and then we can stage and do it right? But that's not always the reality. So,
yep.
So I did some math on this. It wasn't like perfect science, but I took 150 of the last owner occupied versus tenanted. And what it told me is that the tenanted ones took way longer to sell. I sold for 3 to 5% less. And the one percentage that I didn't even do, which I should have, is like, what was the total amount of listings? Like what percentage actually sold? Because I bet it's way lower. Are you experiencing, clients that maybe because of interest rates or whatever else is going on in their life, they have to sell. It has, it's a tenanted property. There's nothing we can do, even if they're month to month. The tenants are okay with it, but like, what's your process? Because there's people listening to this, mathematically 30% of this country rents, that are maybe going through a process like this, or it could happen to them. And then there's people that own as well. What's your process to make this a smooth transaction for everybody?
It's hard. So I had that case last year. I was selling a tenanted property and the tenant kept the place a mess. It's terrible. Yeah. We couldn't stage it. And you know what? Did my client take a bath on the price because it didn't show well because the tenant had so much stuff in there? Yeah, unfortunately, my client did. So, and on top of it, the client didn't want to leave when we actually had the closing date. So we had to, of course, move the closing date back by 30 days. To wait for the client to leave when they felt like leaving. So, now on the flip side, I was working with some buyers where I was showing condos. And I said to them, I was like, don't offer on these condos that are tenanted. Offer on condos that are vacant. Because it's the only way that I, as an agent, can guarantee that your closing date's going to stick and you're going to get to move in when you want to move in. So the whole tenanted properties is really a bit of a challenge. Like I get where the tenants are coming from because the rent is low and now they've got to go out into, we'll call it the musical chairs of going out to find a place to live in Toronto. So it's difficult for them. But, to think that you own a place but you can't control how it's sold. I mean, we really need to reopen the whole Residential Tenancies Act in Ontario. To rethink how it works, because right now it just feels like it's in favor too much of tenants. I recently had a friend of mine reach out to me. He's in a condo building around the St. Lawrence Market in Toronto, and he said that there's a tenant on their floor that's basically creating a disturbance for all of the owners on the floor. You know, the tenant is perhaps doing some sort of sex work that isn't great for everybody, makes a ton of noise, is drilling holes, has windows open so everybody can witness what's going on inside the unit. And you know, and they stopped paying rent about 4 months ago.
Oh, and that, yeah,
So,
that little thing. Yeah.
yeah, just that. No, this isn't a condo building. So, you know, the property manager is limited in what they can do. The landlord has submitted to go to the landlord tenant board. We all know it's about an 8-month wait. So, you know, their hearing's coming up in a few months. So it's problematic for everybody. And again, I feel like the Residential Tenancies Act needs to be reopened and rehashed to make things make sense.
I think that's such good information because potential sellers need to know that, because what you said is absolutely true. We have this conversation with buyers all the time. I literally got off a call half an hour before we started recording this. People are moving from Calgary to Toronto. They want to buy a condo. I said, okay, we're going to start your search so it's only owner occupied or vacant. We're not going to start with tenanted properties because I don't want to get there unless we absolutely have to. So you're literally not showing up in people's searches. And then even if you do buy the tenanted property and you do get it at a discount, obviously you're taking on risk that in that scenario too, like you have to be the one moving in there. You have to declare that you're moving in there. And or I guess maybe you could put a condition that, you know, in this period of time, they sign the N11, you get proof of it, and maybe you're involved in the cash for keys, whatever it is. But it gets like, even me explaining this, like it's complicated to me, and I do this every single day. And for investors, right? So there's always been the thing where you could move back into your investment property if you're moving in there. And I think now you have to stay there for a year, I think is how the wording works. You have to pay the 1 month's rent. But then if you get savvy with this and you're owning these properties in holdcos, you can't do that, right? And that's another thing no one talks about.
And so let's talk about the cash for keys for a second. Is that, you know, some of the tenants with all the Facebook groups are getting wise to the cash for keys. Okay. And that's basically, you know, you're holding someone over a barrel. I mean, it's extortion, really, if we're going to call it what it is.
Yeah.
And, you know, another market that I also I own some property and it's called Prince Edward County. And for those that don't know, that's 2 hours east of Toronto along the 401. And Prince Edward County is a much cheaper market. But I was speaking with an agent there who said that there's a tenant who got paid $30,000 to leave. Now, I've heard people doing that in Toronto, but I'm like, $30,000 in Prince Edward County to leave? That's a lot of money.
Those properties you have in Prince Edward County, are those being Airbnb'd?
Well, there's a couple. I have one, and I co-own them with friends of mine.
Yep.
One is a 6-plex that's on Airbnb, and the other one is a 4-plex that is long-term rentals.
Do those fall under any of the regulations in Prince Edward County because they're 6-plex, because they're bigger? Like, do you still have to have a license? And because they've got a grandfathered in approach there with short-term rentals, right?
Yeah. So I'm grandfathered, but anybody who's doing rentals on Airbnb, whether you are a 1-unit, a 6-unit, whatever, we all have to be licensed. And so I got licensed when the licensing process started. In fact, I run the association out there for all of the Airbnb owners. And so we regularly meet with council, we meet with the mayor, we meet with the staff about licensing and making sure that that process works well.
Steve, out your way, the new Airbnb ban, because I know the way they classify it here is 28 days or less as a short-term rental. Is it not all of BC now that it's 90 days is the new clarification?
Yeah, it's something like, I don't know. I don't pay attention to it because it's not a big an issue as people were making it. But actually, I think the biggest issue with Airbnb is actually people renting the property and then doing the arbitrage without the seller or without the owner knowing about it. So that's the illegal bit, is the tenant doing the illegal thing, not the owner. But it is like 90 days now. And it applies to, I think it's either 5 or 10,000 population. So like if you're greater than that, you can't.
But does it have to be your principal residence flat regardless of where you live in BC? Is that what it is now?
No, I believe it's the population. So it's like it has to be your principal residence if you're in a town over a certain population. But everybody thinks it was a big deal. Vancouver's had no Airbnb for years. Almost all of our stratas, particularly in our condos, were ruled out short-term rentals anyway. And then when they brought in the open rentals that the government did, so all of our rental restrictions are gone, they actually said, no, the short-term rental restrictions can stay. So
and that's where our rules are so different. Like Davelle, I don't know if you follow what happens in Vancouver, but like they used to have restrictions on some buildings, you weren't able to rent them out.
Yeah.
Right.
They opened all that up. Vancouver had similar to like, I think Toronto just copied the Vancouver Airbnb rules where it basically wiped it out. But do you think if like if Ontario one day decides Toronto's rules are Ontario's rules for Airbnb and it has to be your principal residence, your business model wipes out?
It doesn't work because you have places like Muskoka, Niagara-on-the-Lake, Prince Edward County, that this is how they rely on tourism. They don't have big name hotels. And so that's why the Airbnb short-term rental model works. I understand why it doesn't work in Toronto, because in a place like Toronto, you've got big name hotels who are your competition, and their hotel lobby is probably quite big. And so therefore that's why the Airbnbs in a city like Toronto get wiped out and only used in your principal residence. But when you're talking about all of these smaller towns, which it's been cheaper for investors to buy. It's been great for people who want to own a cottage, but feel that they can't afford that cottage by themselves. You know, let's look at a place like Muskoka. Again, for those who don't know, it's about 2 to 3 hours north of Toronto. But the property taxes in Muskoka are quite expensive. So for someone owning a cottage there, in order to mitigate their property taxes, they would put their place on Airbnb. So there's a mix of them using it a little bit, but them also putting it on Airbnb. And so I don't like it that some of the municipalities are clamping down on people's ability to make their own vacation property affordable. But I also don't like that they're clamping down on how I spend my retirement. Because at the end of the day, there's many of us who don't have pensions. And there's many of us who don't want to invest in the stock market. And I don't want the government to tell me that I can't invest in real estate because I've chosen that that's my retirement plan, because I know I can control a house or something I own. I can't control the stock market. I can't control those things. And that's why many people, you guys as well, that's why we invest in real estate. I don't want to have all of my money in the stock market.
I think you and Steve would be great friends. You guys should get to know each other.
We're going to be best friends after this whole thing. This is like preaching to the choir here. We have a solution for you, Davelle. It's called Whistler. Don't worry. All these things are exempt in Whistler. If you're expensive enough and your average detached property is like $7 million, good to go. Don't worry about those taxes. Don't worry about that speculation tax. Don't worry about any of that stuff.
Have you tried to book a hotel in Toronto or Vancouver recently, by the way? It's insanely expensive.
Oh, it's going to be way worse.
Insane. I was just in New York. My New York, now I know there's more hotels there. It was like $250 American a night. Now, it wasn't anything crazy, but like maybe it was the conference rate. Who knows? But still, Toronto, it's like $600.
So yeah, I was looking at going downtown to the Cirque du Soleil last summer. And I looked at Hotel X, which is right down there. And it was like $700 a night. What?
Yeah.
It's crazy. So it's interesting, right? It's a good point that it's the places that have the hotels lobbying more where there's a harder ban on Airbnb. Now you own, several properties in Toronto, a few Prince Edward County we had talked about. Don't you own something in another country as well? Maybe we'll go there and then this is a two-part question. So let's have a conversation about that because that's very interesting to me. And then number two, if you're someone listening to this and you are someone that likes to invest in real estate, do you think this next generation of real estate investors should even be focusing on Toronto, Vancouver, these big markets, or should they be looking outside Canada?
Well, I think because of affordability, people look elsewhere, right? And even my own affordability, I was lucky enough that I have two places in Toronto, but that's why I started to look in Prince Edward County. Also because of my affordability. So there are some of the young people out there who decide they're just going to buy a place in a rural destination, turn it into an Airbnb, they've got their cottage, and then they'll just rent in the city of Toronto. But there's also some people who are just looking at investing outside of the country because, the interesting thing about COVID, and I know there's a lot of people who didn't love the lockdowns, but I think that they actually gave people an opportunity to think and think differently. And so I've seen so many people change their lives. I was talking to someone who upped and moved to Dominican Republic and, is an agent there and has properties there. And I decided to own a place in Barbados. So my friends and I, we bought a house in Barbados a few years ago. And again, I rent that out on Airbnb. And so now I'm like, I want to go up to Portugal and see what the investment opportunities are like there. And now it's complicated to invest outside of the country because there's a lot of government rules that you don't know. And I'm not going to say it's super easy. You need accountants, you need lawyers, you need all that expertise. But for a lot of people, they're like, hey, let me diversify. Let me diversify in market, but let me diversify in countries. And then it's great because now my friends and I have this great place to go party at in Barbados.
So it's lifestyle and investment, which is pretty cool.
And I would add, if you think about how do you want to retire? So maybe my retirement, I'm not a Florida person. I don't care. I'm not going to live 6 months in Florida. But what I might do is spend a month in Portugal, a month in Barbados, a month here, a month there. And isn't it kind of cool that I purchase these properties now? They earn their own income that pays me now. But by the time I'm ready to retire 20 years from now, these properties are actually just paid off. And it's great in my retirement that I can move around the world, still have these properties generate an income, and then I've got a free place to stay. So I think it's also about open your mind about the possibilities of what your retirement could look like.
Yeah, think further than 5 years from now, right? With your real estate investments, which for whatever reason doesn't seem like people that are making decisions are, at least what we see from the online comments. We did an episode with Chris Slightum, who owns LePage Signature, where I work. And it's funny, what you just explained in 30 seconds, we almost did an hour on like Chris's thoughts, and it was the exact same thing. Buy them. Yes, it would be great if they go up in price, but pay down the mortgage. And then the rents typically go up over a period of time. And then you get to a point where you're getting this much money per month, your properties are all paid off, and you got no worries. You can do whatever you want. Like that's pretty cool, right? But you got to think long term, and you got to be able to get smacked by a few big waves, like what interest rates have done, or the market dropping off from the peak, or whatever it is. Now, you had mentioned a few times with the properties outside Toronto, and even the one that you just brought up, that you said with friends. So you've been investing with other people. I've done that as well. Steve hasn't, but you did.
No, I have. I have
originally.
I have. Mm-hmm.
So just like vetting a tenant, or picking a partner for life or whatever, it's like when you're investing in a property with another person, you got to be crystal clear on the goals with each other. So how did that start with you, and how do you know who to invest with? It's going to be a right decision.
It just tends to be, I see how certain friends act and see how they are, so that I think that, yes, they would be good investment partners. I'm now in the situation where I do have a lot of people coming at me saying, hey, if you ever need a partner, let me know. If you ever need a partner, let me know. And I'm kind of like, okay, thanks. I'll let you know. Because I don't want to say anything. So, you do have to kind of intuitively figure out, how is this person going to be in a partner? But then you also have to have everything down on paper. So, some of the partnership agreements that I have, are what if somebody wants out, what happens there. But I also have added extra things. What happens if one partner dies? We don't like to talk about death, but the reality is I don't want to be in business with your heirs. I want to be in business. So, my agreements would have in there something to the effect that if one partner dies, we're buying you out because I'm not dealing with your heirs. We've also had this situation where I'm in business with you, not your partner, your girlfriend or boyfriend or your spouse. And so if that spouse is going to make a claim on our asset, we're also buying you out. We want nothing to do with being in business with your partner. So those are some of the things that we've put in our agreements, so that it's going to work going forward.
And so far, just like only 2% of tenants are an issue. Has it been a good experience investing with other people in real estate?
Yeah, it has been a good experience, but it's funny. I have the case now with one of my properties where all of the other partners want out and I still want to keep it. So now I'm sort of trying to figure out, am I just going to have to sell it, or am I going to have to see what other partners I can get to help me buy them out?
For tenant, landlord, or homeowner insurance policies, go to squareone.ca/the Tom Storey Show. Use the link in the description. Save $20 when you start your free quote right now.
Because it's hard. It's harder to buy out that many people when it's just one person. You can all kind of come together and buy out their piece if it's just you, right?
Exactly.
So we got a lot of people that listen to this that just for a second, let's take a pause on investing in a bunch of properties and listen, they rent. They don't own anything. And they feel like there's no way to get into the market. And they're trying to save money, but either prices go up or interest rates go up and they get stressed at a higher point and they can't qualify and they don't have family money. And would you recommend to a first-time home buyer to buy with someone they know? Now, I get two 20-year-olds, two 25-year-olds. They don't even know what they're going to do next week, let alone 5 years from now. So it's tough. I'm sure the people you're investing with already have their primary residence and other things figured out. Can that translate to people at the beginning?
Absolutely. So I've got a friend of mine. In fact, she's an agent. I want to say 15 or so years ago, her and a friend bought a duplex in Leslieville, back when Leslieville wasn't cool. And, one person is living on the second floor and the other person lives on the main and the basement. And it's worked out really, really well for them. And so that's exactly what I would say to first-time buyers. I mean, I look to a market like San Francisco because it's more expensive than Toronto. And I know that some people in the San Francisco market, that's what they started to do. Buy properties with friends because they can't qualify to buy a property on their own. And so that does work. And I think that more and more people need to come around to that idea. It doesn't mean that you need to live in a 2-bedroom condo together.
Right.
It means buy a house where you each have your own space and you each have your own privacy. But at least that way, both your financials go to your mortgage lender. And for people listening out there, it doesn't mean that you're sharing your financials with each other. The mortgage lender takes those financials and they don't share them with you. They just let you know what the end result is in terms of what kind of mortgage you can get, because 2 or 3 people are on title together. So that's the first thing that I would say, is that that's how you make it more affordable for first-time buyers. And there's also the basement apartment. That's how you also make it more affordable for first-time buyers.
Steve, are you seeing clients take this approach as well, teaming up to get in? I know your business is a little bit different. You've been doing this 15 years now, so you're helping people sell, but do you have anyone coming into the market trying to be creative like this? Because let's be honest, if you don't have family money and you don't have dual income, it's very difficult. Let's just call it what it is.
Yeah, it's very difficult, but I mean, we definitely have had those people that have come to us and I'm going to buy with my friend. And then when we actually do the whole analysis, they'll get into a 1-bedroom apartment each or a studio apartment each. And it won't be ideal, but they come to realize really quickly, if this goes bad, it's going to be a bad thing. And I don't necessarily want to marry into this person, right? For me, my real estate investing is now strictly with people I'll sleep with or share a bed with, right? That's where we stop.
Just to be clear, you're married, right? Yep. Mm-hmm.
I mean, Tom, we have shared a bed before. So, I mean, at a conference when there was no more of those $600 rooms left, Tom and I have slept together. So maybe, but seriously, when you really break it down, I really worry about people trying to look at that as a solution. And for me, the better option would be to go and get the cheapest thing I could to get my foot in the door. That's where I would prefer to go, because I have been in a partnership that went well and we ended on a good note. And if it went poorly, I would not want to be in that situation, because there is always someone that does want to leave early, like you're experiencing now. There are people that are like, hey, you didn't make it to the end of our 5-year agreement. We're only 3 years in. Yeah, but I've made other risky decisions and now I need money out, or whatever that case is. That can be a really bad spot to be really quickly.
Davelle, you had talked about at the beginning when you're going over your thought process of investing in real estate is, single mom, she bought that first property and then helped get to the next one. Could you imagine just if she had never bought that first one and just rented forever, how that would have impacted you, your mother? It's interesting. Now, obviously, you know, we live in Toronto and we've been blessed with the fact that the prices have gone up. But even if they hadn't, she'd still own a property paid off. And that's pretty good as well. So for people getting it, like if you had to start again now, okay, you own nothing, right? What would you do? What's the advice to people that are starting now? They're like, you know, maybe I can afford this, but I don't really like this place. This place is a piece of crap. Like, do I just buy this and get in and ride it?
I would have bought more. I mean, that's the regret, right? The regret, I'm sure, for most people is that, oh my God, prices were so cheap a long time ago. Why didn't I buy more? I had no idea. I mean, the other reason I became an agent was because I owned a condo in my late 20s that I paid something like $200,000 for, and it was 800 square feet. And then I decided that I wanted to get a house. So I sold the condo in order to buy the house because my agent didn't explain to me that I could have leveraged the condo and still bought the house. Mm-hmm. And so that's my regret, that I sold that condo ages and ages ago. It would have been great if I still had it. And so, you know, we've been taught so much that debt is bad, debt is bad, debt is bad, that it's really hard for people to get out of that, because in order to be a successful real estate investor, you have to have debt. You've got to have the lines of credit. You've got to have the multiple mortgages. And so, you know, some people really have to wrap their heads around that, because we've been taught one thing, but in actuality, if you speak to anybody who's wealthy, you know that this is how they got there. So I think that it's sort of the reframing, the thinking that we've had about debt and mortgages and lines of credit and things like that.
I think that's the beautiful
thing.
We
were so close to being friends, Davelle.
Yeah.
We were just...
Steve's just been listening to too much Dave Ramsey, and all he...
Hey, I just lump summed this week on my principal residence. So
I think that's great, and I'm trying to do something similar with a mortgage right now at a high rate. We'll talk about that later because I haven't quite figured it out yet. But that's peace of mind. If your peace of mind is like, listen, there's some people that are probably not right to become a real estate investor. If you stress about everything and you check it every single day, and the one thing that goes wrong, it ruins your life, like this is not. But if you can take on some risk, and leverage is a beautiful thing in the upwards direction and a very scary thing in a downwards direction, which I've said on the show many, many times. And it's gone down the last few years. Like, let's be clear. But if you can think long-term, it puts us in a great position. And, you know, one thing that I'd maybe like to end this conversation on, and okay, investing in real estate. So I think the stat for Ontario is that 40% of condos are owned by investors, right? Yeah. And who knows what the house is or what the actual numbers are and everything. Now, as an investor, they won't be built unless we buy them, right? That's just how it works. Yeah. And then so far, we've been creating the rental inventory for the rental market. Now, that's how that's how us three see it, okay? Because we've done it and we see it. But there are lots of people who believe, no, we're the problem. We're part of the problem here. So can you see that other side? Have you had conversations about that other side? Steve can't see it, but did you understand where they're coming from when people are like, no, you're just buying, you're bidding up stuff, you're buying property so that we can't buy it. I ran a poll on this channel. So how many properties do you own? And I think more people own 3 or 4 properties than people own 0 properties, like on the math.
Right. I think that we're in this phase of scapegoating. You know, we have a supply and demand issue when it comes to housing, which has led us to the housing crisis. We have NIMBY ratepayers groups that don't allow more density to be built. We have municipalities that don't make approvals fast enough and clear enough. And so right now we're into this finger-pointing scapegoating of it's the foreign buyers' fault. Oh, but we only have less than 5% foreign buyers. And when we tax them, prices are still high. Oh, it's the domestic investor's fault. Oh, it's the foreign students' fault. And so, you know, we're into this phase of scapegoating, you know, that these are all the other reasons for the housing crisis. It's not ourselves.
Right.
And that's where we're at right now, is that municipalities can't seem to get that, on a street like the Danforth that has a ton of transit, there's no reason why we shouldn't have 20 to 30 stories on every corner of the Danforth. Why is it low rise? I drive up and down that street and I see all the commercial businesses going out of business because they don't have the density and the population to support those small businesses. And so what they need is density brought on by the condos. And that would certainly give us a lot more housing. So, I see that as being the problem. It's not the domestic investors. It's not the foreign investors. And it's not the foreign immigrant students either.
We had, I guess it was almost a year ago now, or maybe more, Steve. We had Brad Lamb on as a guest. And he was just as straightforward with his answers as you possibly could be. And it's like, he said the same thing. We could solve this. We could.
Yeah.
But the NIMBYism that exists out there is going to make it almost impossible to solve it, right? And if those things don't get solved, then in another 10 years, there's a possible world where prices double again. I don't know if they will, but it's not impossible. It could happen. It's the last 40 years has given us a pretty clear picture of it, right? So I don't know. What's your outlook on where this goes?
Well, I think we're not creating a great society right now with the unaffordability of housing. I mean, on all the Facebook groups or the Nextdoor apps, you can see people talking about their cars being stolen out of their driveways. We see homeless people on almost every street corner now. That's not something that we saw before. And I realize those problems are not just Toronto. I've traveled to many different places around the world recently, and I'm seeing that homelessness crisis everywhere. Whether it's Paris, whether it's affecting everywhere. But I just feel like the governments need to wrap their heads around it and start building housing faster and figure out the homelessness crisis, because it is impacting our ability to live a good life, right? Your cars are being stolen. Soon there'll be petty theft. There's porch pirates out stealing your packages. So we're seeing the effects of what happens if you don't give people the basic need that they need, which is a place to live.
Do you think a double-digit tax increase this year can solve any of those problems?
No.
I'll even take it a little step further here.
Okay.
Yeah, right. I'll even take it a little step further here. I think every time an investor right now, or at least my investors, every time they buy a property, they're helping subsidize rent because they're negative cash flowing $700 a month. So every single time an investor condo is bought, the tenants should be rejoicing because it's bringing more stock to them.
Yes.
Right. And let's stop pretending that there's this massive group of people that if prices just came down a little bit, that they would just be able to buy, because there has always been just over 30%. And by the way, Canada has one of the best home ownership rates in the world.
Yes. We also have the most debt. We also have the most debt.
Well, we have the most debt. Cool. Eliminate credit cards.
We have access to money. Well, no, a lot of it's mortgage debt too, but.
Okay, cool. If we had mortgage debt, but we could eliminate student debt, we could eliminate credit cards and car payments, this whole society runs a whole lot more efficiently. So hug an investor.
Hug. You could put that on a shirt. Nobody would.
Yeah, here we go.
Nobody would buy it, Steve.
I'm going to wear it loud and proud to my showings. Hug an investor.
Davelle, okay, 2 more questions, then we'll wrap it, I promise. But this is a fun conversation. Okay. So for you in the past, looking at investment opportunities for yourself, are there key elements that you look for? Is there like a checklist you have, or is it a gut feeling on this just makes sense?
Cash flow positive.
Okay.
After I do all my numbers, the cost of the mortgage, taxes, etc., can this cash flow positive and put money in my pocket? That's all that matters.
Do you care about appreciation when you're buying an investment property?
I don't think it's not, sure, it's in the back of my mind, but I'm all about cash flow positive. So I know there's some people that would buy pre-construction condos and be underwater.
A lot.
That's not my jam. Losing $500 a month. No, not happening.
It's more than that these days. I'm talking to some people that are losing $2,000 a month. It's a whole different thing.
I don't get that. I like the fact that my property is cash flow positive and give me money each month. That's what I want.
But when I'm just going to play devil's advocate for a second. Some people say, yeah, but you bought those before the pandemic or how many years? So of course they're cash flow positive. Right now, is there any market? I mean, obviously there is, depending on how much you put down, but in Toronto, it's not going to happen with 20% down, right? That's just not going to happen.
And so that's the challenge, is that the Toronto market has been unaffordable to investors for quite some time now because of exactly that. But for someone who's determined to own an investment property in Toronto, what they need to do is take a house and chop it up. Yep. Turn it either into the duplex or triplex so that they can get more money out of that property so that it can cash flow positive. But it's difficult.
And it's probably cheaper, even if you don't have a basement right now set up to be a basement rental, it's probably cheaper to retrofit that than it would be to build a laneway house or all the other things going on or splitting up the rest of your house, right?
Yes.
So I think that's good. The final thing I wanted to ask, I thought I was pretty cool that I got to do media once in a while. And then I see you doing 10 times more than me. How did the media start? You're on every network. You do such a good job. Like, I always love when I see people that I respect and look up to doing the media, and you do such a great job. How did that start? And do you find that your business directly benefits from that? I've had my own experience. How's that experience been for you?
It's so funny because I listened to an interview that you did on somebody else's podcast about this. And so I've had a very similar experience to you. So yes, I'm doing tons of media stuff. Does it impact my business? No. I don't really get phone calls from it. I mean, maybe it lends to my credibility with my friends on Facebook. But am I getting, can I, draw a linear? Yeah, no. But I do like doing it so that it gives me just good content for social. I mean, I started doing a couple of interviews, and then I basically now acquired this list. Every time someone asks me for an interview of 40 or so media people, every time I do an interview, I fire it off to that list. Hey, this is my latest thing, just so that I stay in their memory, in their wheelhouse. So they ask me back again. And that's basically it. But it's definitely something that I've nurtured over the last few years and keep going because I want to do more. I love doing the media stuff. It's fun.
I think it keeps us on our toes, right? I don't get nervous for public speaking anymore, any of that stuff, because I feel like I know what's going to happen. But the media stuff, as you know as well as me, they rarely tell you the list of questions before. You're going on there with a topic and you're like, let's do this thing. And you got to be on it because you don't want to look like a fool on live TV, which is like my worst nightmare.
And so I think it's interesting when I listen to people give advice to people doing media interviews, and they're like, get a list of questions so you can prepare. And I'm like, that's BS. That doesn't happen at all. I took quite a few courses in improv with Second City. This is pre-COVID. And that's the biggest thing that's helped me, because doing the improv courses is all about thinking on your feet. And that's all you're doing with the media, because you're right. They're not giving you the questions. They're just giving you the topic. And then you just gotta say stuff.
Yeah, I love doing it. I had to say no to one when I was in New York because I didn't trust my hotel room Wi-Fi. And I always feel guilty. I'm like, oh no, I said no. Are they ever going to call me again? Because I always try to make sure I can say yes, right? But sometimes you're like, I have a listing presentation. I cannot do it. I'm sorry.
No, you're right. Like I have the same challenge. And so I'm on air on AM 640 Toronto every Saturday morning at 7:30.
Nice.
And so I very rarely don't do that segment. Like I could be in Thailand, I can be traveling around the world, and I will still do what I can to make that segment. There's a couple of times I haven't been able to do it, so I'll let my boss, Kristen Bosley, do it instead. But I don't really want to let another agent do it because I don't want that opportunity to be pulled away from me.
I know. I have a few in my office that I've given it to once in a while, but I'm like, I hope they're really good, but I hope they're not so much better than me.
Exactly.
Speaking of which, Tom Storey, this episode of the Tom Storey Show is brought to you by Starlink, which has mostly held up until now. Thank you, Elon Musk. I don't know what went wrong in your Tesla earnings call last week, but Starlink so far, a pretty good investment.
Yeah, I'm about half an hour away from Prince Edward County as we're recording this, but I'm not going to release I'll tell you offline where I bought a property during the pandemic. This was fun. Davelle, thank you so much for coming on. For people that are listening that want to reach out to you directly, what's the best place for them to go?
Instagram, I'm at Davelle Morrison. LinkedIn, Davelle Morrison. Those are probably the best places to check me out. My website is morrisonsellsrealestate.com.
Amazing. This was a fun conversation. Thank you, everybody, for watching and listening. Hope you learned a lot today. I know I definitely did. Steve, do you want to prep them for who our next guest could potentially be? Are we giving away anything?
I don't think I want to give away because we are set to record soon, but we have not recorded, and this name is so big they would probably tell us to beat it if they felt like it. So Davelle has been fantastic, and we next week we have somebody lined up who might slightly be even bigger than Davelle in the media. So
hard to say.
I mean, we got you guys, the two media darlings for Toronto, sure. This next one is a media darling nationally, if it goes well. Otherwise, it'll probably be me and Tom here by ourselves next week.
You'll find out.
Nice. Well, thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for listening, everybody. Have a great day, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.